I'm Eric Barnes with the Daily Memphian, and welcome to The Sidebar, a weekly show on the community, arts, culture, and more. Today, we're talking to the writer Brooks Lamb about his new book, his first book on Overton Park, and much more. So stay with us for a conversation with Brooks. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Eric. I appreciate it.
The new book, you wrote a book on Overton Park that I think some people who are listening are familiar with. The new book came out fairly recently.
Yeah,
right?
July 25th.
Wow.
Yes. Yeah.
Just weeks ago.
Yes.
It is Love for the Land, Lessons from Farmers Who Persist in Place, a book that reviewers have called excellent, hopeful, and more necessary than ever. So what is the thumbnail? What is the book about?
Yeah, so in the book, I look at why some small and mid-sized farmers are continuing to care for their land even in the face of tremendous adversity. In terms of adversity, I look particularly at three things. One is farmland loss from sprawl and suburban development. It's consuming millions of acres a year across the nation. Tennessee is especially acutely affected by that. I also look at agricultural consolidation. So this get big or get out phenomenon that is really hurting a lot of smaller scale farmers and has been plaguing American agriculture for decades. And then for farmers of color, I look at issues of systemic injustice in the past and also still very much in the present. So looking at those elements of adversity and then asking, despite all of these challenges, why are some of these farmers continuing to care for their land and persist in place? Look at a lot of writings by Wendell Berry, who's a farmer and writer in Kentucky, and have dozens of conversations with smaller scale farmers into Tennessee communities, and ultimately come to the conclusion that it is affection for the land, this relationship they have with place, and this ultimate fidelity or devotion to place into the land that is driving their perseverance and persistence.
Is affection enough in the end, though?
That's a great question. It has powered a lot of perseverance so far, and it is extremely important. That said, and I mentioned this in the book, we need to make virtues, these characters' dispositions like affection and fidelity, assets that enrich and empower instead of liabilities that can really harm people and communities.
How does it harm them?
So right now, a lot of these smaller scale farmers are practicing what I refer to sometimes as self-sacrificial stewardship. They are having to work 2 and 3 jobs in addition to taking care of their farm. Wow. They're turning down unsolicited offers of $20,000 and $30,000 and $40,000 an acre for their land, for people to turn it into subdivisions and housing developments and strip malls. They're turning that down. So they're denying themselves economic gain. They're denying themselves easier lives and livelihoods. They could take that money and go buy a farm somewhere else, but they're choosing not to because of their affection for place.
And is your argument, I don't think it is, but I'll make it sound like I'm on CNN or something, but is your argument that they should?
That they should?
They should they should sell the land.
No. My argument is that we have a lot to learn from their self-sacrificial stewardship and their affection for place. And I think we have something to learn from that, whether we live on farms, and very few Americans live on farms.
Yeah, right.
It's something like 2 million farms are left in the U.S. It's been drastically reduced over the last few decades. But so it's not just if we live on farms. If we live in small towns, if we live in suburbs, if we live in big cities, we can take lessons from these farmers and the way that they connect with place and then cultivate affection for it, develop the sense of fidelity to it. And we can apply that in our own settings where we already are. That could be a community garden. It could be a backyard. It could be a street tree that we pass every day. I mean, it could be, to bring it back to a Memphis context, it could be an urban park. I write about some of these same things in the first book, Overton Park, A People's History. What drove people's care in that instance was their relationship with the park, their commitment to that place. So I argue that we have a lot to learn from these farmers and that we need to do more than learn from them. We also need to support them through effective and thoughtful policy and strategies.
I'm here talking to Brooks Lamb. He's the author of Love for the Land, Lessons from Farmers Who Persist in Place, which just came out from Yale University Press. And I'm Eric Barnes, this is The Sidebar. When you talk, it reminds me, one of my best friends, from first grade on, is a third generation commercial fisherman up in the Northwest. And so I grew up in Tacoma, Washington, and there's a whole affection and a whole culture around that. And I remember because so this was when he started working on his father's boat when he was a teenager. So this was like, the early 80s, and Puget Sound had pretty much been overfished. And as a commercial money-making enterprise, it was pretty much over. Everybody was fishing up in Alaska to make real money. And my friend still fishes up there, but he kept fishing in Puget Sound even when he got to be old enough to buy his own boat. And he bought a little boat in Puget Sound and just said, yeah, no, I don't really make any money. I mean, it sort of pays for itself, but he would spend months out of the year out in Puget Sound fishing. And it was, he ultimately got to where he was just giving the fish away. He was donating the fish. So it's sort of he created a nonprofit, and he kind of did all these machinations to make that work, because that was all he'd ever known. And he's third generation. And, I think two of his kids have been fishing, and it's similar to that, and it makes no rational sense.
Yeah. It really does kind of go against what one would expect in terms of logic. You do all of this hard work. You wake up before you go to your real job and you take care of the farm. Then you go to your real job. And then you come back and you farm at night. You farm on the weekends. You deny yourself vacations and these sorts of things away, all to not make that much money. And so one would look at it and say, why are they doing this? It doesn't make sense. And actually, that point about fishers is something that my landlord actually mentioned to me the other day. He grew up and he was he lives in Idaho, and he worked in Fish and Game and knew a lot of public land managers, right. And he shared those same sorts of virtues that they have for some of their places out west. And so a lot of parallels there, I think. And it's really interesting to me that these farmers are making these self-sacrificial choices. And I think what we have to learn is that sometimes it's important to do what's hard instead of what's easy, especially when we're thinking about so many of the environmental crises that we face. We're facing climate change, species extinction, deforestation, all of these things. And in order to actually reckon with and wrestle with those challenges, we're going to have to make hard choices. We can't just technology ourselves out of these situations.
Right. We're
going to have to make sacrifices. And I think the farmers in this book show us how and why we can make those sacrifices and how they can be meaningful.
Talk about, the natural world and the challenges there. I mean, I was driving in and there was a, thing on the BBC about this was the hottest, July was the hottest month in recorded human history, on an average across all locations. They were talking about it was kind of fascinating. They were talking about, I would have thought, when we've heard about these really hot days that have happened in XYZ place, but they take billions of readings from, mountaintops, valleys, cities, country, and so on, average it all together, and it's the hottest on record. And so I would imagine, from extreme weather to storms, look at, we as Memphis is struggling like a lot of other cities with, oh my gosh, we're having way more extreme weather that's just really hitting our infrastructure really hard, which was underinvested in. And you've got water. We're lucky here in the Memphis area because we have this incredible aquifer. That is not true in a lot of places where farming, California is just farmers in California are on the verge of just, rioting. I shouldn't say rioting, but, are very, very, it is a problematic issue. The management of water that's been going on for decades and the challenges of where people live, where people farm. It's both an industry and it's a way of life. So how is that factor into the other three things you talked about of sprawl, of kind of the growing corporate takeover, farmers of color, all that? Yeah,
well, I think the climate issue is really hitting closer to home for a lot of these farmers across the U.S. And so I was just reading a Washington Post piece yesterday or the day before about a farmer in New York he's farmed hay for generations. I think he was third generation farmer. And because of climate change and some of the extreme heat that we have, it's also causing more rainfall up there. He hasn't been able to get his hay crop in at all because you've heard the phrase, you make hay while the sun shines. He hasn't had enough sunshine to actually make his hay crops. And so he's really struggling, as are a lot of farmers up in the New England and New York area. A lot of farmers in Tennessee and the South are dealing with the extreme heat. You can drive through some fields and just see almost scorched pastures, almost scorched fields and crops. So it adds another element of adversity in that people are having to deal with. And I should mention too, agriculture has been a driver of some of these climate issues that we're facing. Now, I say that.
Amazon alone is a huge driver of climate change in the sense that they're mowing down the Amazon to put grassland and ranch land and other kinds of agriculture in.
Right. And on a domestic level, it's been a big driver as well. What I should say, though, is that these smaller scale and mid-sized farmers, and for clarity's sake, I should mention in the book, when I talk about small and mid-sized farmers in a Tennessee context, I'm talking 50 to 500 acres roughly. And they've dealt with these challenges a lot, but they're not contributing in the same way that industrialized agriculture is to the climate problem. So it's the same way we see a lot of nations who are feeling the effects of climate change the worst are the ones actually contributing the least to pollution and global warming and these things. Similar, a lot of the farmers who are contributing the least are actually practicing diversified agriculture that's increasing soil health and sequestering more carbon in soils and doing these good things. They're not the ones contributing, but they're really feeling the effects. So if you look at concentrated animal feeding operations, you look at some of these massive row crop farmers that are farming thousands upon thousands of acres and all the equipment and machinery it takes to do that. They're really driving a lot of this problem, and the smaller scale farmers are feeling a lot of the effect.
Talk about farmers of color. And so you've got all that, plus you've got, a historic legacy that we're dealing with on many, many levels in Memphis, around the country, around the world too. But we're really just talking about the United States. What did you learn there?
Yeah. So as you said, so many small and mid-sized farmers are dealing with a ton of systemic challenges already. And then you throw on the element of racism and racial injustice and having to deal with all of that on top of all the other challenges of small scale farming. It is amazing that some of these farmers have continued to be in their rural communities. We've seen something, and I don't have the exact statistic in me. It is in the book if people want to check it out.
Yeah.
Something like a 97 or a 98% decrease in the number of black farmers, specifically in the last century. To see the amount of land under their control dwindle from like a high of 15 million, 16 million acres in the 1920s to 4 to 5 million acres now. It's really concerning. And there's been a lot of things that have really driven that racial injustice. There's loan denials and delays from the USDA and from federal government sources that have hurt a lot of these farmers. And there's been class action lawsuits that show all of the evidence of these things happening. There have been the traditional experiences with racism that people think about, the violence, the antagonism in rural communities. There have been issues with property ownership structures. There's something called heirs property, HEIRS, that has especially affected a lot of black farmers. Essentially, a landowner passes away and they don't have a legally valid will, so they die intestate. Their land passes down to all of their heirs who own it in a tenants in common format. And if they don't do something to immediately settle that estate, the land will continue to be owned as heirs property. And owning land with family members, not inherently a problem, but because of inadequacies in the law, there have been loopholes where just one person, say there's 100 co-owners, 99 want to keep the family farm. One says, actually, no, I want to sell it. It can be forced to be sold at a public auction. Another challenge is that people can buy shares. So maybe a real estate developer comes to one of those 100 people and says, hey, look, I know you don't have a ton of involvement in your family's farm, and I see, you could really use some money. I tell you what, I'm going to be really generous to you. I'm going to give you $3,000 for your share in your family's 300-acre farm. What do you think? I'll give it to you right now. I'll write you a check. I'll give you cash. That person's never seen $3,000 in their lives. And so hand them that money. They become an equal co-owner. The developer forces the sale at public auction, buys the farm for pennies on the dollar, transforms it into a subdivision or whatever it may be. So that's been a really pervasive problem across the U.S. And then last thing, and I know I'm going on and on here, but this is such a crucial lens to look at agriculture in the U.S. There are all sorts of like microaggressions as well that really take a toll after a while. So one farmer that I interviewed in the book, she described being in a meeting with the Farm Bureau and they were hosting some sort of auction to try to raise money. And when she put in a message in the chat saying, "Oh, this reminds me of the livestock auctions I used to attend as a kid," and someone immediately responded and said her name and said, "You don't know anything about any farm auctions. What do you think you are, a farmer?"
Yeah.
And her family's been on that land for over 100 years. And so people's automatic assumptions that if you're black, you can't be a farmer, that really takes a toll on people.
If you're a woman.
Right. Yeah. If you're a woman. Exactly. Yeah. So people who make those assumptions and make those microaggressions, that takes an emotional toll. And after a while, that emotional toll really starts to add up and hurt. And it adds another element to people being able to persist through those sorts of things.
Yeah. Again, we're here with Brooks Lamb. The book is Love for the Land, Lessons from Farmers Who Persist in Place. But before I do some housekeeping, where do people get the book?
Yeah. So if you are interested, you can go out to Novel if you're in Memphis. We had a really wonderful signing event out there. I'm very grateful to the folks at Novel for hosting me.
Yeah, they're great.
They really are. So you can check out the book at Novel. You can also go to my website. It's brookslamb.com. And you can see all sorts of different places you can buy the book. You can get it on Amazon. Yep. You can order through Barnes & Noble or Target or any sort of online outlet. So lots of places you can get your hands on a copy.
All right. We will talk more with Brooks Lamb. We'll talk about the Overton Park book and some of the other things he's involved in. But again, reminder, I'm Eric Barnes, and this is The Sidebar, which airs on WYXR 91.7 every Thursday at 11:30. It's focused on the community, arts, culture, everything in between. It's not just a radio show, though. It's one of many weekly podcasts we do at the Daily Memphian, including the Behind the Headlines podcast, Bill Drees and Sam Hardiman's Politics podcast, On the Record, the Memphis Grizzlies podcast, and our food podcast, Soundbites, hosted normally by Jennifer Biggs, who's still out recovering from her colon cancer. And right now, Chris Harrington is still hosting. Holly Whitfield has been pitching in. I've appeared on a couple. So, that one also is on WYXR as well as being a podcast. And it's on WYXR every Thursday at 11, right before the sidebar. All of our podcasts you can get on iTunes, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts, except Stitcher, which is going away or has gone away. I'm looking at Natalie Van Gundy, producer, going away. So you got to make the switch. You and Holly Whitfield have to make the switch from Stitcher. You can also get the YXR shows at WYXR.org or on the WYXR app, that includes all, not just our shows, it includes all the music shows. It includes the talk shows. You get archives of all the shows, all archives of all the music, which is fantastic. So, and I should also note, you should consider becoming a supporter of WYXR. It is a nonprofit radio station, listener supported. Become a member, make a donation. All that's at WYXR.org or on the WYXR app. And you should also subscribe to the Daily Memphian. The Daily Memphian. It's been 5 years, and I'm now calling it the Daily Memphian. The Daily Memphian, which we are coming up on our 5-year anniversary in September. More on that as we get closer. But become a subscriber, become a donor. All that's available on dailymemphian.com. Next week on the sidebar, we've got Steve Selvage, the musician. He's got a somewhat recent solo album out with some other Luther Dickinson and Paul Taylor. He's been touring with the Hold Steady. He's got all kinds of things going on. So we're talking to Steve about all that. And as part of the 5th anniversary, we've got Dan Conaway, columnist for the Daily Memphian, coming on soon. Andy Cates, who's the board chair or one of the co-founders, my friend, he's coming on to talk about what we can piece together is why in the world we decided to get together with other folks and start the Daily Memphian. We did talk to Jeff Calkins recently and Otis Sanford. That was maybe a month ago now, but we talked about a whole range of things, but including just the state of local journalism. Kind of walked with Jeff a bit through how the whole Daily Memphian thing came about. Those are all, again, as I said, available on WYXR. They're available on the Daily Memphian or wherever you get your podcasts. I mentioned Behind the Headlines, a TV show we do with the great folks over at WKNO. We have coming up on next Tuesday, August 15th at 7 o'clock, a mayoral debate with moderated by me and Kanji Anthony coming out of retirement, or at least coming out of TV retirement to do this. We're really looking forward to that. If you're listening to this after the 15th, you can get the video of that debate on just search Daily Memphian on YouTube or search for the mayoral debate on the Daily Memphian site. So you can watch that again on August 15th. Most, but not all, of the major candidates will be there. And we are doing one-on-one interviews on Behind the Headlines with all the major candidates who will agree to do it. We have so far done Michelle McKissick, J.W. Gibson, Frank Colvett, who has actually since then dropped out of the race. Coming up soon, we've got Van Turner, Paul Young, who who am I missing? Natalie. Floyd Bonner has committed. I'm looking at, yes, Floyd Bonner is committed. Only former Mayor Harrington has said that he has said that he's coming on. He's not going to be at the debate, but he's going to come on and do a one-on-one interview. So we're going to get all the top 8 candidates for mayor on Behind the Headlines, all that leading up to the election on October 5th, but early voting starts 3-4 weeks before that. So it's right around the corner. Last but not least, I should say also, if you're following the mayor's debate and if you tracked everything I've said so far, Sam Hardiman on the On the Record podcast through the Daily Memphian, he is doing one-on-one interviews with most of those same 8. So he recently sat down with former Mayor Harrington. He's got Floyd Bonner coming up. He's had Paul Young. So different perspective. Like, we're trying to throw everything we can at the what will be a very, very important election. Last but not least, our small business seminar is coming up on August 24th at 3:30 at the Memphis Botanic Garden. We've got 3 different speakers that day talking about small business, talking about how they got started. That is an event you'll need to register for that. You go to Eventbrite and search for Daily Memphian, and you can get all the information on the speakers on, August 24th at 3:30 at Memphis Botanic Garden. But we're here with Brooks Lamb, writer. Your first book was I wrote Overton Park. You mentioned already Overton Park: A People's History. How did that come about? And that's where we first met very briefly, because I think you were working as an intern at the Overton Park Conservancy when I was on the board of the Overton Park Conservancy, right? You were a Rhodes student, and I think we met briefly there.
I think that's right. Yeah. So the book came about. There's actually a kind of a farm connection here as well. So I grew up on a small family farm in Middle Tennessee in Marshall County, and came to Rhodes in the fall of 2013, and got here and loved Rhodes, loved my friends, loved my classes and my professors, and loved Memphis, and still love Memphis. That's why we're here. But I was terribly, terribly homesick. I missed the farm and land so badly. So I moped around for a while, as one does, and then instead of moping, I started to nurture and leverage that homesickness into service. And so I got involved in some community gardens in Memphis, and then really found my calling through interning and working with Overton Park Conservancy through a service scholarship that I had. So while I was there, I did typical intern things. I reorganized spreadsheets. I picked up trash. I planted trees. And while I was doing so much of that work in the park, I started to hear these stories from people who were volunteering alongside me. And they shared typical stories like their first dates happening in Overton Park. And they shared extraordinary stories about stopping the interstate from paving over the park, about racially integrating the park in the 60s. And so as an intern, as a volunteer there, I felt really inspired by those stories. And I thought, well, if other people could hear these stories, maybe they would be inspired to take better care of this really special place too. So I started doing oral history interviews, trying to understand a lot of those stories, trying to tell the park's story through the people who lived its history. And that's kind of how that book came about. I'm very grateful to the folks at Overton Park Conservancy, to my professors and mentors at Rhodes for really supporting me. I turned in that manuscript for publication consideration the week before I graduated. And so also very thankful to University of Tennessee Press for taking a chance on a really young writer at that point.
Yeah. You then went on to Yale and got your master's in these kinds of things.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. So I worked for 2 years after graduating from Rhodes with the Land Trust for Tennessee, doing rural land conservation. And then I left there. Thankfully, I had support from the Truman Scholarship to go back to graduate school. Went to Yale School of the Environment, studied environmental studies with a special emphasis on place-based connections, people-place relationships, and looking at all of that through an agricultural context. So that was a really special experience. I didn't necessarily expect to go to graduate school and make a lot of friends. I'd always heard you treat graduate school like a job. You go in, you do your classes, you do your research, and you go home. And I met some of the most wonderful people through that experience.
And you're also at the land protection, and you're a land protection and access specialist at American Farmland Trust.
That is correct. Yes, it's a mouthful.
Yeah, sorry, it's good. It's only written down in front of me. What does that do? What does that mean?
Yeah, so American Farmland Trust is a national conservation organization that focuses on saving the land that sustains us, is our tagline, through protecting farmland from development, enhancing and advancing sound farming practices that are good for the environment, good for the land, good for people, and then trying to promote economic viability among rural communities and small farmers. So in my role particularly, I work on raising public awareness of farmland loss, building public support for farmland protection, trying to help local and state leaders especially advance farmland protection programs, try to help next generation farmers access land. That is the number one challenge facing new and aspiring farmers in America is access to land and secure access to actually farm on the ground. And then I work a lot on the heirs property issue that I mentioned to you earlier, trying to help farmers through that, trying to raise awareness and advocate for solutions to that as well.
Talk for a minute about, we just have a couple minutes left here. Talk for a minute about writing. We've had a handful of writers on. In my other life, I write novels. And I'm always interested in how people write and their rhythms, and it's different. I mean, nonfiction, God help me if I ever had to write nonfiction and do all that research, I would die. I would just die. But it's still writing, right? I mean, there's this kind of commonality. So I'm curious your sort of rhythm and your habits about writing.
Yeah. Well, you're a great writer yourself, Eric. So I appreciate you asking about that. It is true. But, yeah, it's something that really feels, like a calling for me, as cheesy as that may sound.
Oh, there's no other reason to do it. Yeah, that's for sure.
Yeah, because I mean, you're dang sure not making any money doing it. You know,
the income per hour is irrational.
Yeah, no, and so it really does. It feels like that calling, and I really, I like to write on these bigger projects. I've had the 2 books now, and they've been really meaningful, and I think they've I hope made an impact, and I hope that this new one will get out in the world and make an even deeper impact. But I really also like the anywhere from 700 to 1,500 words kind of op-ed type pieces and telling some stories and really trying to hook people with these personal anecdotes. So I just recently had a piece come out about my experience on my family's farm and how growing up there on a small scale farm in a family farming operation helped me realize the power of touch in farming. So much of farming nowadays, you never actually touch what you're farming. You never feel it. And I grew up in a type of farming system that was not the case. We touched what we were farming many times in the process. So trying to relay those personal stories into larger themes. And I'm very much someone, this is like a very logistical aspect, but I write well early in the morning, or I write better early. I don't know that I write well, but I write better early in the morning. So I'll sometimes wake up really early and write for an hour or 2 before work starts, and then I'll work all day, and then I might return and, revise things in the late evening or whatever. But it really does feel like a calling for me. It's something I really enjoy.
Yeah. And last question as we run out of time here, because YXR is fundamentally a music station. What was the first concert you ever attended?
Oh, first concert I ever attended? Oh my gosh.
Yeah, what kind of concert in Marshall County?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm trying to...
Maybe a county fair kind of thing?
It probably was. We had some small concerts around home, I think, growing up. So I don't know about first concert. I will say one of the best concerts I ever saw was actually here in Memphis. I saw Old Crow Medicine Show at the Orpheum.
Okay.
And that was incredible. Also went and saw...
Natalie was there. Natalie Van Gundy, producer, was there.
Fantastic. We may have been sitting next to each other. And then saw Billy Strings in New Orleans a few months ago. And he is one of the most talented people I've ever seen in my life. So check it out.
Okay. And again, Brooks Lamb, it's brookslamb.com. People can learn more about these, both your books, where to get them. They can get them at Novel. They can get them at wherever else they might buy one. Thanks so much for being here. Really appreciate it. And congratulations on the second book. That is all the time we have this today, though. Join us next week. Steve Selvage is on talking about a new album, The Hold Steady, all kinds of things about music. If you missed any of the show today, you can get the full podcast of the interview on the Daily Memphian site, WYXR, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks very much, and we'll see you next week.